So earlier we were talking about the question of all the waves in the mind and how we can control them based on the idea that the mind is something like a non-material thing, subtle thing, and yet material, even in its subtlety. Something like a lake can be compared to that, with all kinds of ripples and disturbances on the surface of it, on the top. But it's underneath, we can call it the subconscious area. And it's like having mud and a flocculant. A flocculant, aluminum sulfate, is used as a flocculant and coalesces around the particles and it settles on the bottom. And it gets stirred up from time to time. And that's one image. Another image we were using shortly was the idea that all these impressions are inputs, and when they coalesce, we call it this habit. Now, how to change a habit? Well, it's really difficult because a habit is a habit. And when that habit itself coalesces and becomes more entrenched, then we call this a personality, a mode of behavior. But we can interpret it really as just a whole combination, combinations of different types of waves. And Patanjali has identified 5 types of waves. Now, we know that if 2 waves coalesce, or if 2 waves interact with one another, they cancel each other out. This is called an interference pattern. And so what Patanjali is steering us toward is the idea of neutralizing the waves which are not useful to us by introducing a counter wave. For example, if we have developed jealousy, or if we have developed a habit of reacting adversely in adverse circumstances to somebody, if we think that we have to plan reprisals, for example, or revenge, or if we feel hurt in some way by human interactions, these are some common human things that we all experience. And if we don't notice it, then it forms a kind of dark area in the unconscious mind. And we can't, as I say, have access to it. It's down deep in the vaults of the unconscious mind. We can only do it through conscious effort. And so practice is the conscious effort of raising up an alternative wave and then allowing that to act as a neutralizing agent. It's like in chemistry, if you have too much acid, then you put some alkaline with it. If you are operating, for example, a swimming pool whose clarity depends on accurate pH, a measurement of acidity, then, of course, if it's too alkaline, if it's too much lime, then you add swimming pool acid. On the other hand, if there's too much acid, then you put in a little lime. And it is by operating this idyllic condition within the water that the water becomes clarified. It's the same thing with the mind, which is seen to be something like a fluid thing, erupting into waves of various kinds. And so one practice, the practice we have to adopt would be discrimination, basically, and non-attachment. But what we mean by discrimination, it means we have to be acutely aware of when a negative emotion or thought comes up in the mind. We have to allow it, very contrary to the interpretation of the second sutra, which is there, that we have to empty the mind or we have to repress. No repression here. Any psychologist will tell you, do not repress anything. Allow it to come. Let it have its day. Be good-humored about it. Come if you like. Stay if you can. Go if you must. Have a cup of tea and off you go. But immediately on leaving, you're leaving a gap in a time framework. And there I'm going to put something chosen of my own. And if you fill that with a mantra, so be it. But the mantra has to have a meaning. It's not a blank. And if it's a blank, it doesn't have this neutralizing effect. And how do we add the value to mere words? We put meaning to it. And meaning comes with feeling also. You can repeat 1,000 million billion times matter, 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 but in repeating it, I can assure you it doesn't matter. You have to understand, what is it that you're saying? What do you mean by it? Is it the material earth? Is it the body? What do you mean? Can you define it? So a mantra will have a meaning because not only will it have maybe a primordial sound that evokes a certain vibration, but we have to have the meaning with it as well. And that is what makes it interesting. That's what makes it have the potency as a kind of lock and key that unlocks something from inside. It's not only a neutralizing thing, it creates an added joyful value also. So, for example, one person who's attending here, maybe their partner might be, let's say, in India or something, and naturally you'll be concerned about that person, and being concerned about the person, you'll be thinking of that person. And when you're thinking of that person, you're thinking of the name of that person, and with the name comes the whole image, and with that may come some associated concerns. I hope this person is all right. And that may stimulate, let's say, a telephone call or whatever it is. Now, if you just said the name without any of these things, just absent-mindedly, if there was a way of detaching meaning from all of that, then it would be like repeating paper or something, or the name of some immaterial or some material object, I should say, something that doesn't have any impact for you. So we see this in our own thinking. Our mind can be off somewhere, as it were. Our attention can be drawn to something somebody said somewhere, and somebody else may be talking and we're not really hearing, although we are listening. But in the faint background, we're hearing a series of words and we're not attaching meaning to it because our attention is attracted somewhere else. So these samskaras we form habits, and it said a habit is second nature, says Swami Vivekananda, but it is first nature also. And the whole nature of man, everything that we are, is the result of habit. And this gives us consolation, because if it's only habit, then we can change it. And often you hear people saying, oh, that's my nature, I can't do anything about it. And the danger, for example, of the Enneagram would be that people resign and say, oh, I'm a number this, and they're looking at the compulsion and they're not looking at any other thing. And so, unfortunately, there's no time really at the end of an Enneagram course to have a period of digestion of the liberated form of that number. That's why we probably should meet, those who've been on the Enneagram from time to time, and have a revision of some kind. So if it's only a habit, if it's only an accumulation of impressions, then we can easily change it. And these samskaras that are left by these vibrations passing out of our mind, each one of them leaving its result. Our character is the sum total of these marks. You can say our personality, our character, our behavioral trait. And according as some particular wave prevails, one takes that time, that tone. And if good prevails, one becomes good. And if wickedness, one becomes wicked. And if joyfulness, one becomes happy. And the only remedy for bad habits is counter habits. The only remedy for bad habits is counter habits. That's the whole thing. And in this text I'm reading from, the commentary, which is very old, it's a little battered by now. My handwritten notes are there. I've underlined this multiple times. There's no other remedy. The only remedy for bad habits is counter habits. All the bad habits that have left their impressions are to be controlled by good habits. Go on doing good, thinking holy thoughts continuously, without a break. That is the only way to suppress base impressions. Now we see the value of statements from, let's say in Christianity, St. Paul, pray without ceasing, or constant remembrance. Be mindful all the time, right thinking in Buddhism. Never say any man is hopeless, because this person only represents a character bundle of habits. And this bundle of habits can be checked by new and better ones. So character is repeated habits, and repeated habits alone can reform the character. So you form deliberately, consciously new habits. And this continuous struggle to keep these vrittis perfectly restrained, this is what is called practice. Previously he had said practice and non-attachment. Well, what is practice? Tatra shito yajna abhyasaha. Continuous struggle to keep these vrittis perfectly restrained is practice. In other words, practice is continuously bringing up counter habits. See, people don't read these passages, unfortunately. So bring up counter habits. This is the only way. The commentary goes like this. What is practice? The attempt to restrain the mind in chitta form to prevent it going out into waves. It becomes firmly grounded by long, constant efforts. Efforts of doing what? Playing a game. What is the game? Bringing counter habits up. But doing it with great love. I've underlined this in the text. For the end to be attained. Don't do it as a struggle. Don't do it as a penance. Don't do it as an arduous thing. Don't do it as a kind of work. No, you do it with great love. Great love for the end to be attained. Now we can insert a little language of the devout worshipper. Constant efforts to attune the mind or the attention into the love of an intimate personal God and receive that love. Doing that tuning in constantly is called practice. We can put it in a different way. So staying attuned to the glory of the divine self or God, this is called spiritual practice. And doing it constantly, all the time. So when we talk about what mantra should I use, what mantra are you using when you drive the car, when you get up in the morning, when you brush your teeth? What is the mantra that you're using? Is there a break? And if there's a break, notice it, pick it up again. But do it with great love. Do it with meaning. Because the impact of what is already there is because it was meaningful for you in the first place, rightly or wrongly, correctly directed or otherwise. It was something significant to you. And that effect which comes to those who have given up their thirst after these objects, either seen or heard, and which wills to control the object, that's called non-attachment. So, Vashikara, Satya, Vaira, Jnana. That effect which comes to those who have given up their thirst after objects. What are objects? Objects either seen or heard. These are the primary senses. And which wills to control the objects. I want to control the objects. Today I gave a little talk to some a few devotees. And so we were discussing the story of Rama. The person, of course, is listening to these Saturday talks in the Ramayana. And they're also doing a series for children. Wonderful. So I asked them, so what are the 3 lessons that you'll learn from the story of Rama, which is a universal story because it is an epic. That is, it is a masterpiece of literature. And the Greeks also have a masterpiece of literature, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These are two great masterpieces in Greek literature. Well, there are two great masterpieces in Indian literature, Mahabharata and the Ramayana. And the story of Rama is the more ancient, and what lessons do we learn from it? Well, the first thing that we learn from it, not in any great order as such, is that we need to control the two genetic directives that drive us, because otherwise we'll get caught up in a world of repeated habits. Then what we mean by greed? Well, that's an interesting question, because greed is one of the primary directives that we have. Now, you may say, I'm not a greedy person, but greed will relate to the various senses, and we have to take stock one by one and see what is greed is exceeding. I gave a definition, exceeding the basic needs for the human being to operate in an instrumental way in life without any undue comfort. We require shelter, we require food, we require sleep, we require something to drink. We are required to look after the instrumentation of the human body, and we're required to keep the mind active. It's not a lot to ask, but it does require a little effort. And if the effort is not pleasant or joyful, then it adds to the negativity. So there was, in the 1960s, I think it was, or 70s, I forget when, there was a famous Hollywood actress who decided in retirement, I suppose, to be a kind of teacher, if you like, on videos and recordings and what have you. And the famous phrase was developed from that person, that is, go with the burn, or something like that, that you need to really, really, really work hard in order to maintain your physical health through exercise. And you see, the people liked it for a while. But you want to do hard work for the rest of your life, probably in the Enneagram terms, probably number one. You want to do that all your life. At some point or other, statistics will show that people won't like it for very long. They'll give it up. They'll start off with a brand new good intention. They'll go to a gym. And the people who own gyms are quite experienced in knowing this trick. Please pay all your annual fees up front, Brian. But then within 3 months, let's say, most of the people dropped out. And so they made money and they didn't have to give any instruction. So we have to make sure that this effort that we put in is not a struggle, but it is really just replacing, again, making a counter thing. The best way to overcome any addiction, what do we mean by addiction? Well, the extreme examples of drug addiction, alcoholic addiction, and so on, is to create a better counter addiction. Make a magnificent obsession somewhere, eat it, drink it, sleep it. And with this magnificent obsession, then your original one falls away. Something new has taken place. And that is why rehabilitation centers have proved to be successful, not just to stop the intake of harmful substances, but also to bring in something new, some kind of faith-based thing. There are many Christian organizations who have done this and who have persuaded people in the language of Christians to give their life to Christ. And when they catch on to that, and it has the uplifting psychological effect, it becomes a better addiction than the harmful one. It now becomes a good one. And non-attachment is something, therefore, that happens by itself. In other words, when you shift the attention to something more interesting, more delightful, then the other thing falls away by itself. The two motive powers, says Swami Vivekananda on this, of our actions are one, what we see ourselves, and two, the experience of others. In other words, this is the elaboration of things that are seen and things that are heard. We can hear all kinds of things, all kinds of gossip. And my grandfather was a wise man. He used to say, you see, never believe what you hear, and only half believe what you see. He was a skeptic. So these two forces throw the mind, the lake, into various waves. Renunciation is the power of battling against these forces and holding the mind in check. But we can use the word battling if we will. But, sometimes young people, teenagers, and so on and so forth, they simulate a battle through video games and so on. And their renunciation is what we want. I am passing through a street. Now he gives a good example. And a man comes and takes away my watch. This is my experience, or that is my experience. I see it myself, and it immediately throws my chitta into a wave, taking the form of anger. Allow not that to come. If you cannot prevent that, then you're nothing. If you can, you have vairagya. Again, the experience of the worldly minded teaches us that sense enjoyments are the highest ideal. These are tremendous temptations. To deny them and not allow the mind to come to a wave form with regard to them is renunciation. And so, supposing, even when we take stock of the senses, supposing because what is beyond our needs is all relative, and we take each one of the senses and then we examine, am I indulging any one of the senses beyond my basic needs or beyond my basic expressions? Whatever is there being indulged in, is it out of a sense of purity? Is it out of a sense of purity of intention? For example, is it out of pure love? Or is it simply out of entertaining, or out of I've lost the word I'm looking for now, but anyway, just out of obedience. I'm going to use that word anyway, so it'll come to me, to the senses. Let's give you an example. Supposing a child demands from you that they want a certain thing to eat. Let's say it's ice cream. And every time the child demands it, the parent gives it. Well, we know that that would be harmful for the child, and the child won't thank you after the tummy ache. And so the senses are like that. After all, the senses geographically are part and parcel of the psychological makeup that we overall call mind. Indriyas are internal things associated with the external instrumentation that we call the organs, but the real organs, or the real senses, are in the mind, and they have to operate only when attention is associated with them. So we can take our attention and steer it somewhere else, and we can then use our intellect, our judgment. Is it good for you? Just as a parent will judge for a child, well, you see, a little bit of ice cream may be okay, but more than that, that's not good. And using that judgment, we can operate. There are many, many saints who have this technique, of addressing the mind, like a small child, putting themselves in the role of a kindly aunt or uncle or parent. Oh, my mind, choose. You want this way or that way? Choose, my mind. Choose, oh, my mind, choose. Famous composer Tyagaraja wrote a song like that. You want this or do you want that? And even after the long discourse in the Bhagavad Gita, still Sri Krishna says to Arjuna, so I presented everything that I need to present. Now you choose the best course. We give you an option. It's up to you, entirely up to you. So we have to use our good judgment. And that is why the arbitrator is that faculty, mental faculty that we call buddhi or intellect. It is the intellect that acts as an arbitrator, acts as a guide, acts as an estimator, and eventually as an executive officer. So applying this is also called viveka, which is, as you know, discrimination or discernment, as I prefer to call it. So he goes on to say, these should be controlled by me and not by them. This sort of mental strength is called renunciation. What a peculiar and interesting definition of what is renunciation. Renunciation is mental strength. It's a sort of mental strength, and that is called renunciation, or vairagya, or detachment, whatever you prefer. And it's really the only way to freedom, but we have to do it by the previous one, that is choosing a higher value, a different counter wave, something which is more interesting, more valuable, more lasting. Elevating it in a joyful way, taking the raw material that we have. After all, anger is just energy. Love is just energy. But which is preferable? The love or the anger? The love is better. So all these operations and vibrations within the mind are all bubbling up energy. Psychic prana is how Vivekananda describes it. And because it's energy, we have the capacity to say, my dear, please flow here, now flow there. And who's in control? You flow here, don't flow there. You know the dangers of flowing there. Resentment. No resentment, that you will feel bad about it. I'd rather do this. Blessing, love, radiating, beaming goodness and truth and beauty everywhere. Why not do that, please? And as soon as you do that, but what's the basis for that? The basis for that is seeing the reality there and coming away from what is a changing thing. I'm going to blank off my microphone and see if from all of that there's some kind of question.
More of an observation than a question. And I just like your opinion on this, Swamiji. So today I was out walking and a nun was walking in front of me. And I realized it was a nun because she had a rosary bead in her hand. And it struck me that as a nun, she was reminded to recite something like the rosary or something to that effect. And it then brought to mind my own meditative practice and my own mantra. And as I recited my mantra, I'm not sure if I put a lot of thought and feeling into it, but I did have a very warm feeling. And it just made me realize that in a busy street where I had my to-do list of shopping and stuff to do, it was just that moment. And I'm just wondering, is having a tool something in your pocket, on your person, that as you touch it or see it, it reminds you? And I know, the avid follower will do this continuously every day, but sometimes life gets in the way. But what are your thoughts on a little gentle reminder or something? Sorry, yeah.
Well, the challenge before us tells us we need 1,000 tools. Why not use all of them? So some people wear some kind of amulet. I wear a watch. It reminds me of the time, to connect with the time on a frequent basis. And it's not just time, it's not just a mechanical thing or an operational thing, because I am aware that I come as time, says Krishna. Who else is there except time? What else is there except time? This whole universe is an interweaving of time and space and causation. And so I'm not afraid to indulge in it. And then you see, some people have reminders on a calendar or reminders on a diary. And so, yes, in the monastic traditions of various kinds, there's a symbolism to dress. So we talk about changing a habit, but I suppose in a convent or a monastery, changing a habit is about laundry. So if you see what are the various symbolic ways that a person dresses? Now we all have to dress. And so could it be that every time we dress, it reminds us of something? Even as basic as you put a shirt on or a piece of clothing on, well, the body is also like a piece of clothing. And we can take it on and we can take it off. And what we call death is taking it off. And what we call life is putting it on. And sometimes your shirt or your clothing has holes in it, and sometimes it becomes threadbare. They call it old age. And then, okay, you have to take a new piece of cloth. So you see, it's a question of seeing the lessons of life. Life itself, nature itself has multiple lessons. Everywhere you look, nature has lessons for us and is guiding if we have an eye to see it. But if we don't have an eye to see it, if we're caught in a small world of issues to do with other people, to do with scenarios and histories and stories and what have you, and what somebody says and what somebody doesn't say. One of the waves that Patanjali mentions is verbal delusion. What does that mean? It means our imagination goes wild. We hear somebody say something and the imagination goes off. Like my famous story about passing information, which at the end of the day is going to be distorted, not really understanding the truth of something. And I'm sure I told somebody recently how it was. Anyway, I'll tell it again because it's funny. But if you've heard it before, it's not so funny. Anyway, I'll risk it. So you see, we are told that the Pope and the Jewish people in Italy had an argument, and the Pope said all the Jews have to leave Italy. This is going way, way back, and in some ways has a little bit of truth to it. Anyway, certainly in Spain it was like that. Anyway, the Jewish people objected, and they put a rabbi, their best talent, and said, look, if you can find a reason for us to leave, theological reason, then we'll all voluntarily leave. However, we don't think that it's true. We don't think it's just. We'll have a debate. And the rabbi can't speak Italian, and the Pope, he cannot speak Hebrew. So they agree that they will have a silent debate. How do you have a silent debate? You have to use sign language. And so they sit there at an appointed time. Big gathering takes place. And the Pope then, he puts 3 fingers up to illustrate the Trinity. His point of view is you can only get salvation when you understand that God is actually 3 persons in one. And the rabbi puts his 1 finger like this. And the Pope then, he puts his finger out like this and says, of course, you know that this God is all around us. And the rabbi, he goes like this. points downwards. And then eventually the Pope brings out the wine and the wafer, saying, only through this blood of Jesus will you gain salvation, will you be cured of your sins. And the rabbi brings out an apple, and the Pope says, that's it, you've won. I can't defeat you. And his cardinals say, what happened? He says, well, I told them about the Trinity, but then he reminded me that there was only one God. And then when I said he's all around, he reminded him, yes, but he's right here. And then I reminded him about the sanctity of Christ's sacrifice. And he brought out an apple and reminded me of the original sin of Adam and Eve. And I can't defeat that. He's quite right, you see. And then the Jewish people surrounded the rabbi. What happened? What happened? We were so astounded. The Pope has allowed us all to stay. What a brilliant thing. He says, I don't know. He says, you see, the Pope said to me, you have 3 days to get out. And I told him, go to hell. And then the Pope said, yes, all of you will get out. And I said, no, we'll stay here. And then he brought his lunch out and I brought mine out. And there it is. So you see, we can imagine many things. This is called what Patanjali calls verbal delusion. And this is our imagination. We imagine all kinds of scenarios. When we review the past, it's in the imagination because it's gone. It's not present to us. And when we imagine any scenario in the future, well, it's not arrived yet. It's gone. And we can make many false assumptions from this and get ourselves into a very anxious state about it. The reality is here and now. It's in this present moment. And in this present moment, in this very second, that's where we invest all our sacred energy. And then you see the next second we do the same. So yes, we can remind ourselves continuously on the basis that we are suffering from forgetfulness. So any clue is there. If you're at work, why don't you put a picture of your beloved? You see, the Roman Catholics have this also. You were brought up as a Roman Catholic. I happen to know. I was born in a household like that. Every room had a cross. Every place had a picture and so on. In the ashrams that we have, we put pictures of Ramakrishna and the apostles of Ramakrishna. We put pictures of everything. They may even be the same pictures, just to remind us. The presence of a shrine is a reminder. And so you see, we can put the color of our cloth is a reminder. And the dhoti that we put on is a reminder. And I personally wrap a cord there to remind me also. So all of these things are reminders. You select your own. And yes, and the reason why that nun is carrying a rosary is she's doing japa. And the reason why they're carrying it, even without doing japa, is that it's handy there to do the japa, the rosary in their case. A person puts a cross around their neck. Well, some of it could be ostentation. But you can carry something and keep it discreetly just to remind you. So yes, all of these are very, very useful things. Use what you want. Use the advantage of music. Use the advantage of chanting. Use the advantage of the long summer days where there's so beautiful sunrise and sunset. All of these are advantages. Use the advantages of various times of the day. Use advantage of the mood of the morning, the mood of the evening. These are the possibilities. Use the ritual of lighting a lamp or an incense stick to remind you of all-pervading fragrance. So there's a value in all of that. So the answer is yes, there's a value, in short.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yes. Okay, all good. You see, some people carry a picture. In human life, what you do, you may carry a picture of your sweetheart in a wallet or something. So you can carry a picture of your Ishtadevata also. And keep it on your desk where you do most of your work or something like that. Keep it in front. Occasionally have a glance at it. stimulates the imagination. If you're a visual person, you use the visual. If you're audio, you use the audio. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.